Okay, now joined by Ryan Owens. Ryan is a professor of poli-science. He is an attorney, and he's also the director of the Thompson Center on the campus of UW-Madison. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to be here.
Well, you have been really important, I think, in using the resources of the Thompson Foundation, the Tommy Thompson Center, to be able to look into what's going on actually with students and free speech issues. You just commissioned and completed and released a survey of attitudes towards free speech. Now, is this primarily on the Madison campus?
Yes, this is exclusively on the UW-Madison campus.
Give us a little bit of the parameters. How many people, what kind of setting? Give us a sense of how the survey works.
Sure. Well, so what we did is we worked with the UW Survey Center, nonpartisan, sort of non-biased center, very reputable, on campus here. And I worked with our faculty advisory committee to put together a series of questions that would focus on students' views on things across the spectrum with the First Amendment, not only free speech, but also some religious liberties questions as well. And so we handed it over to the Survey Center. They implemented the study. We reached out to about 500 or 30 so undergraduates over the course of a couple of weeks' time. And, the results were somewhat alarming to me. When we take a look at what students have to think about free speech principles, it's clear that they don't know enough about the First Amendment, not only just the contours of what it allows, permits, doesn't prohibit, but also the value of the First Amendment. And I'm certainly happy to talk about that a little bit more as we go on.
Sure. So the survey then was sent out to, with surveys of this size, surveys like this. Would you argue this is a standard survey? It's a pretty. Is that number of students, 500 or so students? Is that a typical number? Is it a shorter number? Is it a bigger number for a survey?
That's probably a little bit larger than most that you'd see. I think, there are a lot of nationwide surveys that are around 300-400 or so people. They're able to weight it a little bit more than we were here. So we reached out to as many students as we could get. Our response rate was in line with the responses that other campus outfits get. Everything about this survey was pretty consistent with standard surveying techniques. We put the results of the survey on our website at Thompsoncenter.wisc.edu so people could see them, the crosstabs, in addition to the report that we put together. So, it's not a perfect sample. It's fairly close. But the fact is, look, we just don't know how many liberals or conservatives there are on campus. So, we had something like 74% of the students surveyed identified themselves as social liberals. Is that inside or outside the range? We have no way of knowing. What we do know is we got a large number of students. Approximately 60% were females, while there are roughly 53% of females on the UW-Madison campus. So a slight overrepresentation of females, but so what?
And that's a pretty big number. I mean, I can imagine with, 70, would you say 70%, 74% identified as social liberals?
Yeah, and it was about 40-30 or so in terms of economic liberals versus conservatives, and then moderates in between. So this strikes me as a number that's in line with what we would expect from UW-Madison students.
I would argue probably most colleges across the country you're going to get numbers like that. So you were surprised. Obviously, you're pretty sober about this. I know you and I have worked together on various committees. I know that you're pretty sanguine about this. You understand how left-leaning in many instances universities were. But even there were things in this survey that bothered you, somebody who expected this to come out a little bit heavy on the liberal side. Give us some examples of some of the questions or some of the polling results that really actually surprised you.
Yeah, well, some of the highlights or lowlights, I suppose I could say. And before I begin, not only did these results surprise me, or bother me, I should say, but many of the faculty members on my advisory committee, who themselves are either moderate or left-leaning, I think they were all somewhat concerned by these. So among some of the other findings we observed, almost 40% of students that believed that the government should restrict the speech of climate change deniers. Over a majority of the students believed that the government should restrict the speech of racially insensitive people. Now, we never explained to them what it meant to be racially insensitive, so they had to go with their own beliefs on that one, what that might mean, but that subjectivity is actually kind of part of the problem. 63% believed that the government should punish hate speech. Over 35% believe that public institutions should revoke invitations to speakers who might say something offensive. And over a majority, 53% or so, believe that an employer's religious beliefs should have to give way to his or her employees' beliefs about things like abortion and contraceptives. And so what we saw across the board with almost every issue we focused on, except for the media, was some pretty significant support for restrictions on free speech issues. And when we dug down a little deeper into the data, we found that self-identified liberals were significantly more restrictive of free speech than self-identified conservatives were, and that females were systematically more supportive than male students were.
Yeah, the minute you say that that's how you think that would have been, they brand you for being stereotyping, right? And I'm beginning to wonder, we reach the age, Ryan, where if studies like yours aren't going to themselves be seen as evidence of bias, right? I'm getting to the point where with my kids, anything that demonstrates to them the possibility of their own bigotry, they turn it around and they don't like it. What kind of response are you personally getting? And I'm also interested in this. You have an advisory board, so obviously you have a board, and that's made up of not just conservatives. You got some liberals and left-leaning people on that as well.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so what was the reaction of some of the more left-leaning professors when they saw these numbers?
Well, the folks on my committee were, I think their perspective was very similar to my own, was that this is troubling. And, the First Amendment, the thing is the First Amendment isn't political in its own nature. It's not a partisan entity, right? So supporting the First Amendment doesn't make you a Democrat, doesn't make you a Republican. It makes you an American. And that's something that we have to wrap our heads around. What I'm hearing right now is there are a lot of students who said that they find the report to be hurtful. And that's fine. Okay, so it's hurtful. But the fact of the matter is the First Amendment is there for a reason. Yes, it often gets invoked when you are protecting the speech of disgusting, hateful people. And it's not as though people who support the First Amendment are out there because they believe in this hateful speech. Rather, we're there because we know historically that governments snuff out the views of their opposition whenever they're able to do it. And historically, it's been the majority with power that will stifle the free speech rights of those who are out of power. And so the ironic part about many of the pushes that we're seeing right now, not just here at Madison, but elsewhere, is that it's those who find themselves or perceive themselves to be out of power who are the most eager to get rid of the First Amendment protections that we have. And I think if you spend any time looking at history on the First Amendment, you recognize that, by God, free speech rights are there for a reason. It's there to protect us and not to allow government to tell us how to think, eat, pray, anything.
My sensibility is that the students, and I want you to talk more about this, you say that certain students and student groups find what you've done hurtful. I mean, all you've done is give a survey. That survey, as you say, oversamples women, who tend to be more liberal anyway, oversamples women and men who identify as liberal socially. So what is there to have be hurt feelings about? This seems to be an accurate register, an oversampled register of how liberals on campus think. In what sense do groups or individuals on campus find this hurtful?
Well, I think, I certainly don't want to speak for them, and I don't agree with their perspectives on this at all. I think, you go out, you collect the data, and they say what they say, and if you don't like the results, then do something about the underlying problem rather than the results themselves. I think from their perspective, they think, all this person is trying to do is support the rights of those who are saying hateful things on campus, and that's just baloney. The point is that we need to have some humility about what we allow people to do and not do. You cannot, as an individual on this campus, think that you know the right answer to everything, and consequently those who oppose you must be squished. That kind of lack of humility leads to tyranny. It leads to all kinds of problems, and that's where we're headed in this country. The response to hateful speech or speech that you disagree with is to oppose it, to attack it on its terms, and not to just shut down people's voices. So an institution like this, we can't countenance that kind of stuff.
I can tell you, I've taught at 7 different universities, none quite as big as Madison. I've taught at Purdue University. I've taught at Oklahoma State University, smaller colleges as well. And it's the same thing everywhere. The other thing I would suggest and that I find kind of interesting is in every instance when I've dealt with kids on free speech issues, liberal kids never think anything they say is offensive. That if they're speaking their heart, calling you a Nazi from the deep conviction of their liberalism, then you've earned that epithet, right? But it's always the speech of the other people. And so I wonder if some of the we're hurt by this stuff is the sense that you're assuming a level playing field, right? The more dominant liberalism becomes in colleges, the more minority voices, which happen to be primarily conservative voices, are silenced, the more the progressive left has no way to measure anymore. I mean, they're so used to the norm of being able to shut down things and speakers. I mean, I must wonder if we gave them examples of actually putting into practice what they ask for. All right, this speaker that we're bringing into campus, Wendy Davis, for instance, former communist, former terrorist, we're not going to let her speak because of her unrepentant attitude to those actions. I wonder how the left would react to speech codes then.
Yeah, it really is quite disturbing. And I think, look, let's see what the university does on this. At the end of the survey, we come up with some potential proposals that the university might consider, one of which is to require that all students who graduate from UW-Madison take a class or at least have some training on the First Amendment. I mean, I see this as a viable thing to do. I mean, look, when students come out of UW-Madison and most other universities in the system, they have to have a number of general education requirements. Classes. Why? Because the university knows that being well-rounded students is good for the community writ large. You also have to take training on things like alcohol abuse, sexual assault, and the value of diversity. All of these things the university believes to be important for their students as they go out in the community. It seems to me that notions of free speech, civility, dialogue in a country such as ours, in a state such as ours, is equally important, and the university ought to get behind this. Now, look, I understand that a lot of this stuff happens before these students even get to the university. One of the things that we really need to dig down into in this country is what in the hell is going on in K-12 schools. I mean, just today, I could overhear in one of my students' classes, my son's classes, excuse me, every single teacher has been talking about what happened in the Capitol yesterday, and they're having safe spaces to discuss it and all this stuff. Yes, it's awful. What happened yesterday was absolutely terrible. But you can tell that these teachers are taking these situations and they're blowing them up more and more and more. Before the election, one of his teachers said flat out to the class that Donald Trump is a white supremacist. He said it 2 days in a row. And this is the kind of nonsense that our students are hearing by the time they even get to college. So yes, the university has some issues. I hope that the University of Wisconsin will look into this and will do some training to recognize this issue. But I got to say, by the time they get here, they've already been exposed to a lot of this left-leaning stuff already.
Oh, yeah, I think that's exactly right. They come to campus primed. The sad thing is that there just seems to be little interest on college campuses of pushing back against that, of trying to bring some moderation back to these kids. So in other words, colleges are taking advantage of the already very leftist position of the incoming kids to justify, being more generous in giving funds to bring liberal speakers in than the conservative speakers, to not being willing to put conservative speakers through ringers, like you may have to pay for your own security if you want to come. These inequities we've seen on college campuses between liberal and conservative speakers. But I would also go one step further. You and I both know that according to the Regents Board's recommendations for all campuses, all UW campus system schools are required to give some training on First Amendment issues to incoming freshmen. It doesn't happen at my school. I'm almost 100% sure it doesn't happen at Madison. And so if they're already ignoring their own regulations by not providing First Amendment training, why are you thinking that maybe they would do it now?
Well, I mean, what they do right now is they just give students a pamphlet. It's like a sheet of paper and say, here you go, and that's it. That's your training. We wouldn't tolerate that kind of stuff elsewhere. I mean, certainly we wouldn't tolerate that kind of thing when we're talking about, racial diversity, or when we're talking about sex diversity, anything like that. When it comes to intellectual diversity, we need to treat that as a form of diversity and to be respected like other forms of diversity do. So why would I expect the university to do it? I want to give them the benefit of the doubt on this and see if they do it. I don't think you gain anything by coming right out of the gates casting aspersions. So we'll see if they do something. They may not. But this is a survey that's put in empirical form, data presented to them about their own students and their students' views. It's hard to run away from facts like this and sugarcoat them. So we'll see what they do. We're going to give these results to the Board of Regents as well. We've given them to the system. So everybody knows the results of this survey. We'll see what happens with it.
So so everybody knows who's watching. Now that the survey's done, it was done on campus. Who have you handed it off to? And if there would be change coming, what would the mechanism of that work through? Would this be something that the campus would vote on itself? Is it something that the administration could just impose? If the university wanted to act on this in a positive way, what kind of things might we see happening next?
Well, I think one of the things we'd look at is, what the chancellor does here at UW-Madison. They're aware of this study, and I know they're looking into it. So we'll see if they make any statements on it. If they look into this, one suspects that they would reach out to me at some point to ask questions about it. So I think the chancellor could do something. I think, the regents as well could do something if they see this as something that's more systematic across the system, right? They could try to initiate a survey like this at other universities in Wisconsin to see if it's the same kind of result everywhere. And if the answer to that is yes, then move forward. There are a lot of options here, but I think we've got to do something. This is pretty clear. So whether it's a class that everybody has to take, some more training, whether it's additional work on syllabi, to talk about the First Amendment implications of things that people are studying at times. I think there are things to do. What we don't want to do is come in and impose some sort of reform. I think at this point, what we want to do is recognize that there's an issue, show people that there's an issue. And, if you're a conservative like I am and you believe in local control and federalism, that sort of thing, I think the first thing we want to do is see if universities come up with different ways to resolve this. And if they don't, then I think we've got to look a little bit more systematically at it. But the underlying concern is there. The students don't seem to be knowledgeable about the First Amendment or supportive of it, and we've got to change that.
What troubles me, and you feel like if you don't want to comment on this, that's fine as well, but I'll give you the opportunity. What troubles me immensely, that is, if you had these numbers on a survey at a major university like University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we were getting numbers back that took these kinds of declarative statements that had this kind of majority support for anything otherwise, right? Like if there was this kind of support for closing the borders down, there was this kind of support for not letting illegal immigrants have driver's license. If there was this kind of support for anything that might be seen as more of a right-wing issue, in my estimation, universities would be acting fast and quickly to address it. It seems like you said earlier, and I've seen in the course of my career, when it comes to diversity of ideas, the universities are absolutely resistant to treat that in the similar serious style that they do almost any other kind of diversity.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I cannot for the life of me understand why they are so opposed to this idea. Diversity itself is supposed to expose people to views and ideas and perspectives with which they have not been in contact previously. That is the whole purpose of it. And when you talk about racial diversity or you talk about sex-based diversity, that's why universities justify these things. And yet, when it comes to actually holding them to account on this and talk about a diversity of perspectives and views, then they become very rigid and opposed to it. I just do not understand it. It's not consistent with their philosophy. It's ethically and morally wrong. It's reprehensible, frankly, because what it does is treat individuals as pieces of a puzzle. It treats them as categorical creatures whose lives are created, designed, set up just by virtue of their birth, their color of their skin, or their sex. And that belittles human beings so much. I think as conservatives, we recognize the worth of the individual, the dignity of the individual. And if you believe that way, then you have to recognize that individuals come with all kinds of different baggages and backgrounds, and we've got to support that. Take a look at faculty members at your campus. How many of them come from law enforcement backgrounds or military backgrounds or farming backgrounds? It just doesn't happen. The academia right now is dominated by upper middle class white people who share a liberal perspective. That doesn't make them bad people, but it does make them somewhat circumscribed in their views of the country and puts them surely far to the left of the median voter in this country. And I think we can do better.
Well, to me, it's a matter of diversity. When you are declaring a platform of diversity, but that diversity turns out only to be everybody looks different but thinks the same, not only are you contravening diversity, you are engaging in quantitatively verifiable racism, right? I mean, you are arguing that the color of your skin alone confers diversity and nothing else. It's really shameful. And like you said, it is so inconsistent with everything else that a liberal frame of mind would lead you to. It just seems the only thing I can think of is that there are such majorities for that kind of liberal thought on campus. Why let go of that if that's one more way to hold on to power, to keep people thinking the way you do, is to not let go on that, right? If people feel that way, let them feel that way. We're not going to fight that.
Well, there are two immediate consequences of this that I can think of. Surely there are more, but the first is, obviously, this is going to put universities on the chopping block. If what they do is try to aggrandize and perpetuate a left-wing ideological perspective, which not everybody does, to be clear. I mean, there are many, many good left-leaning faculty on campus, but to the extent that there is a broader push towards keeping one, sort of broad ideological agenda, it places universities on the chopping block, and they cannot then, in response to this, then fall back on this notion that they're sifting and winnowing when all evidence points to the contrary. So that's the first thing. You keep pushing this kind of stuff, you're going to get slapped down more and more and more. The second thing, though, is perhaps a little bit broader, harder to grasp. But we do know this, that when everybody has a particular view and they start forming groupthink, we know that they make poorer decisions. We know that they stop looking for different sources of information to challenge their own thought. And as a consequence, the things they think they know, they actually don't, right? So it can become dangerous to be a monolith in an ideological perspective. And I think we're doing students a disservice by then failing to prepare them for a broader community that is not necessarily as liberal and left-leaning as college campuses are.
I'd add one third point about all of this is that what we're seeing is that rightly, your faculty colleagues, serious scholars, they're concerned, even the liberal ones. It's the students. And what bothers me is that the students are being radicalized. And how many times across the country do we see students, particularly left-wing students, demanding greater restrictions on speech, greater restrictions on who we hire, who we bring to campus? And that's where your universities cave, right? You're right. There are many fine liberal faculty that don't impose their views on students. There's a lot of that going on. The problem is that as the student body becomes more radical, no one stands up to them. Universities, including UW-Madison's been in the news over the last couple of years, caving into demands. I would suggest the removal of the rock, right, that is going to happen on your campus now because somebody somewhere said it might have racist overtones is an exact example of what I'm talking about. Go ahead. Because that's an example of what I'm trying to talk about. It's when liberal sacred cows are involved. Students, the louder they push, the more radical they get, the more institutions refuse to challenge them. The universities are willing to challenge conservative students. They're willing to challenge right-wing worldviews. They are not willing to offer the same adult respect to progressive kids. We can't say no, it seems, to progressive kids on college campus, and that's where the system is really off of whack. When you think about the degree to which progressive students are able to make demands on universities, that universities don't feel the strength that they have to fight it off. But to shift to my last question to you, let us know. Is there anything else you're planning to do? Are you going to do more surveys? I know I'd love to see one. I'd love to work with you to try to get one here at UW Oshkosh. What are your immediate plans to you're going to wait and see what happens on your own campus, but are you considering doing other things right now that we could help with?
Yeah, I think I know that there are other campuses that are looking at doing a survey that's similar to this, and we'll see what they have in store. We'd be happy to work with other campuses if they want to do this, because this is an important issue. It's not going away, and I think our students benefit from a greater knowledge of the First Amendment. I think the society does. It's not just students. We've got to remember, and I think administrators have to remember, it's not just students. It's not the University of Madison. It's the University of Wisconsin at Madison. We're a flagship university. We do a lot for the state. The Wisconsin idea gives us that direction. And so I think it benefits the state when we do things correctly. And I'm hopeful that the campuses will look at this and try to investigate ways they can improve on this. And I will say just briefly, too, this comment about the rock that gets removed. This is one of the things that drives conservatives absolutely bonkers about universities. Right now, we are all being furloughed on campus because we don't have the money to sustain all of our salaries. Yet the university can find money in their budget to remove a rock that somebody called, a horrible word 100 years ago. Give me a break. Let's get our priorities straight here.